President Obama's Attorney General Eric Holder lambasted a federal judge's order this week curtailing communication between the Biden administration and social media companies. Holder took to Twitter on Wednesday, calling the decision, quote, pretty stupid and potentially dangerous. The judge ordered the preliminary injunction to protect free speech, which he says could have been curbed as a result of a government effort to fight false information and narratives it doesn't agree with about coronavirus and other issues.
The mainstream media also blasted Judge Terry Doughty's decision, maintaining it could allow for misinformation to run rampant. As journalist David Zweig pointed out on Twitter yesterday, the New York Times zeroed in on a statement Doughty previously made where he said, quote, COVID-19 vaccines do not prevent transmission of the disease. We now know that quote-unquote debunked statement turned out to be true. So, Jessica, what do you make of Eric Holder calling this decision stupid after there has been quite a bit of evidence that the Biden administration was working with big tech companies to try to censor people?
I think it's stupid, but not for the same reason Eric Holder thinks it's stupid. I think it's stupid because it's still a caveat in this decision that if the government deems, the post on social media or what have you, a quote, national security threat, they still have the right to have it be taken down by whatever, social media company they're dealing with. And that's the excuse they always use. So to me, it's like, will this actually change anything? Will this actually reel in any of the government's power over what posts are on social media? Who's going to subpoena or FOIA that information from the U.S. government for them to disclose why it's a national security threat or how? I don't foresee that happening, which means the government will still have discretion over what social media posts stay up or not. So I don't really see this case having much of an impact on actual practice and policy when it comes to how the government handles cases like this.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, especially when it comes to COVID, the government's excuse for rooting out what they referred to as misinformation and disinformation was that it was a public health or national security threat because of the threat of the pandemic. And so many of the items that they were involved in censoring at that time turned out to be true. I mean, that example right there, where they said that it was misinformation to say that the COVID vaccines did not prevent transmission. There were other claims that were censored, such as the idea that the lockdowns might have had more latent deaths or negative side effects than lives actually saved. They censored things like women saying that their menstrual cycles had been disrupted by the vaccine, or that the vaccine didn't stop you from getting COVID. And it just seemed like item after item that was deemed disinformation by social media companies at the behest of our public health bureaucrats ended up being right. And I think what they've done by having a direct hand in using these big tech companies to censor people who were asking questions and trying to find the best information is that they only destroyed trust in their institutions, and they made it harder for people to trust them. So regardless of the judge's decision, I think the damage has already been done, wherein government officials have proven themselves to be untrustworthy, have proven themselves to be censors working on behalf of and directly with big tech companies. And that's not going to leave the American people anytime soon.
Yeah, I think there's also, this is twofold, right? There's the issue of censorship, so the government flagging content to the social media companies and asking for it to be removed. But there's also this aspect of the government obtaining data from a lot of these corporations. As we just covered when we spoke about Twitter, they have a lot of information on our private messages from DMs, not just on Twitter, but from all of the social media apps, including WhatsApp, Facebook DMs, Instagram DMs. There's a lot of communication that the government can easily get access to on the grounds that there's a potential national security threat. So when we talk about having some kind of state-run media or a large corporation that has access to all of our data, that's the reality we're living in. The government can easily access any of our personal data that it wants to. And that's something that I think should scare us a little bit, especially when we see Congress trying to also pass legislation that allows them to remove entire web-based apps if they deem them to be something that is unsafe, right? They frame this as we might need to ban TikTok because China's meddling with our data, getting information about what cat videos they watch. Really what that legislation was about was allowing them to have the power to limit what we can do on the internet, Should the government have that power to do that in a free society? I don't think so. I think the control over communication is very scary and very dangerous, especially when the information being shared is of the public interest. And who gets to decide where that line is something that's really unclear in a democracy. And I think it's safer to be on the side of let more information flow rather than let the government regulate more and get access to all of our data.
Yeah, and we also have to be clear about just how aggressively the Biden administration was working with these companies to censor what they deemed misinformation. It wasn't just the case where they were, emailing a PR contact at Twitter and saying, hey, I think this post might violate the terms of service, or even just going through the normal reporting process. There was actually a really concerted effort to make sure that those lines of communication were open pretty much 24/7. So in the New York Times article where they basically tried to take the side of the Biden administration, they still admit that this was a really comprehensive relationship. They say that there was a top digital advisor for Biden who was emailing officials at Facebook, urging them to do more to limit the spread of vaccine hesitancy. At the CDC, officials held what they called weekly sync meetings with Facebook, emailing the company 16 misinformation posts. And the Surgeon General's top aide in the summer of 2021 was urging Google, Facebook, and Twitter to do more to combat disinformation. So this was not just some harmless situation where people were going through Twitter and trying to find posts to report, but they were actually going directly to the executives at those companies and basically putting pressure on them. And the huge rub here is that if the government officials are in fact putting pressure on these companies, that is a First Amendment violation. And it takes away this explanation that the left has tried to use from the Biden administration and members of the media, that these are private companies and they can get rid of whatever information they want. That just doesn't work if you're doing it at the behest of government officials under the threat of perhaps more regulation or public condemnation. That obviously runs into an issue of government-regulated speech.
I think the left or the progressive left is very critical of this, and liberals are definitely making excuses for the Biden administration. And it seems to be, in the case of COVID especially, in the direction of, well, it was for public health and public safety. They didn't want people getting the wrong information. Okay, from a public health perspective, if you want to manage coronavirus and help people get vaccines and spread information about it, do an effective and good job communicating your position and the research that you believe in, that you are relying on to make policy decisions. It is your job to be a good communicator so that we have good public health in this country. If you are failing at that, your response of censorship, I'm sorry, I just don't believe in that. It's your role as the government to do a good job administering public health. And COVID, quite frankly, was a communication failure in the realm of public health. And so it's actually their responsibility to do a good job communicating. And by them taking the easy way out, I don't have any respect for that decision there to then be censorship. And I think that led in the long run to more mistrust, because it seems like the government's hiding things from us. It seems that maybe there's a reason they don't want us to see it. It makes people wonder. It makes people come up with conspiracy theories. They're sowing mistrust by doing that. And then as I reflect on Rick Scott's recent video out of Florida, Senator Rick Scott said he doesn't want socialists or communists coming to Florida. It reminds me of this McCarthy Red Scare era where they did use this reasoning of these leftist ideas being a national security threat because we can't have people in the U.S. Sympathizing with the Soviet Union or what have you. To limit the free exchange of ideas in that way was really harmful. And so if you are progressive or leftist, most people are very skeptical of policies like this.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think that liberal should have been the term that I used as opposed to left. And I also think that this harkens back to the Hunter Biden laptop ahead of the 2020 election, where the Biden administration, or at that time the Biden campaign rather, had a group of former national security officials sign a letter claiming that that was Russian disinformation. And then that became the impetus for big tech companies to censor the story about the laptop across both Twitter and Facebook, and actually suspend the New York Post for reporting on that information. And so when you see that in concert with all of the censorship regarding the coronavirus pandemic, it does seem like it was the Democratic Party that was really pushing hard to make sure that inconvenient narratives were not able to be shared among Americans, even if they were accurate. And that is very dangerous for any democracy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I just don't see it from like a right-left dichotomy. I think we've seen this for many, many years. People in positions of power using their power so that people don't dissent from it. If that means controlling social media, that means controlling social media. If that means controlling print media and being in cohorts with the people running newspapers before the age of internet. It's been going on for centuries in the United States. And so I am always skeptical of people in positions of power who frequently and have been for a long time using that power to quell dissent in a country that supposedly has a right to free speech and free press. It seems that that amendment and that basic right has never really been guaranteed in the United States. And I think it's good people are focused on it. I think that means we'll get closer to it. I wish it was a more united front of the people who want to enjoy the free speech against the people in power who have used it for a very long time, instead of them sowing this dissent across the line of right and left. Because I think it would be much more effective if we all said, hey, we actually all want free speech. This is popular across any party identity, and both parties do this.
We'll be back with more Rising after this.